evening. You're welcome. This is the final webinar in our Fall and Winter 2024 series, even though it's 2025, presented by Newton Conservators. My name is Beth Wilkinson, and I'll be the moderator of this event. And Nyssa Patten is our technical director tonight. As most of you know, Newton Conservators is an all-volunteer nonprofit established in 1961 that connects people to open space and that works to preserve and to maintain open space in Newton. We hope you will consider joining Newton Conservators. We are grateful for the beauty and sustenance that the land provides for humans and the other creatures with whom we share the earth. We acknowledge the Massachusetts stewardship of this land that kept its ecological communities vibrant, strong, and interconnected for thousands of years. Naturalist Barbara Bates presented the first webinar of our Fall and Winter series, and now, just before Valentine's Day, she's back for the final webinar to show us some of Newton's larger animals looking for love and the myths that surround their quests. She will talk to us tonight about owls, groundhogs, possums, skunks, beavers, foxes, coyotes, and bobcats. For more than 16 years, Barbara Bates was a teacher naturalist for Mass Audubon's Habitat Education Center and Wildlife Sanctuary in Belmont. She has retired several times, first from a long career in the high-tech world, and then from teaching as an adjunct faculty member at Northeastern. She is a Newton Conservators board member, and as you will discover if you don't already know, she loves all things nature. We're very fortunate to have her here to talk with us tonight. So welcome, Barbara.
Thank you, Beth. I am happy day before Valentine's Day, everybody. It's February, and February for animals means it's time to court and find a mate. This is the time of year when not just people, but also many of our mammals and our large birds are looking for someone that they can settle down with and start a family. And there are many, many kinds of Valentines in this group. There are some really deadly ones, like this great horned owl, some milly ones, like the foxes and the skunk that you see down here, and very noisy ones, like the foxes and the coyotes. But what's this whole business of Valentine's Day being in February anyway? Well, it's the day that St. Valentine, one of the three St. Valentines that existed and were canonized by the Catholic Church, it's the date that supposedly this St. Valentine was martyred. And he was martyred because as a priest, he performed marriages for Roman soldiers who were not supposed to be getting married while they were serving in the Roman legions. And so he was martyred, actually executed by the Roman government. Now, at the same time, during February, was this Roman festival of Lupercalia, which was a very pagan festival, involved blood sacrifices of goats and all sorts of pagan rituals involving fertility. And that, although it was 500 years before the Common Era, that was frowned upon by the Catholic Church, and they were looking for a way to sort of supplant that pagan practice. So St. Valentine's martyred day was the beginning of it. That grew into something much larger, and by the Middle Ages and 14th and the 15th centuries, where you have courtly love and the romance novels and the romance passions of everything happening in those days and times, it was thought by, especially in England and France, it was thought that birds would start trying to find their mates in February, that this was birdsong month and birds were looking for love. So a popular myth developed that if a woman saw a particular kind of bird on Valentine's Day, that would determine who she would marry. So if she was lucky enough to find a blackbird, she'll be marrying some sort of priest, which is kind of interesting. If she saw a bluebird, she'd at least get a man with a sense of humor. If she saw a crossbill, she'd get an argumentative husband. If she saw a dove, a very kind man. We should all be blessed with a dove, right? Goldfinch, wealthy man. A robin, and I don't understand how this works with the sea, but if she saw a robin, it would be a man of the sea. Now, this was a robin in Europe, which is different from our robin. At any rate, if she saw a sparrow, she'd get a man of the country. But if she saw a woodpecker, she wouldn't get married at all. She'd have no man. Humans, in the meantime, court with dinners and gifts, gifts like candy and cards. And that's been going on for a long, long time. But it was only recently that Cadbury delivered its first heart-shaped box of chocolates. This was in the 1860s. And when Hallmark made its first Valentine, it wasn't until 1916. So lots of old cards before then, but Hallmark's first Valentine card was in the early 1900s. Owls, however, deliver rats. Now, you may say to yourself, what has a rat got to do with looking for love? And you'll see in this short video, I'm going to show you a couple little pieces. It's the animal's way of showing that they're a fit provider. And great horned owls, as you're seeing here, even though this one is taken in Texas, great horned owls, as you're seeing here, will court each other with hooting and bill rubbing, as you're starting to see here. But also the male, which is much smaller than the female, by the way. The male is on the left here, the female is in center. The males will bring prey animals, nibbles, little nibbles. So let's take a look at this. Here you see the male approaching the female the hooting, reciprocated. He's very careful to approach her very, very decorously. And there'll be some bill rubbing. Little kissy face here. Bill rubbing. Now, in that bill rubbing, he's getting satisfied that she's going to accept him. And we're going to move ahead a little bit so that you can see what he brings her. He is bringing her a rat. And this rat is held in his talons when he first approaches the nest. So you won't see it in his mouth. So he's on the nest now. He's flown in. He's got the rat in his talons. You see the white patch of feathers expand as he hoots. He's drawing the mate in. She's coming in. He's got the rat. There she is. It's about time, she says. And slowly tells her, go off and get me another rat. She'll take that. So that is an important part. So why this mating time in the middle of the winter? Well, it's all about timing. If you're going to have babies, you've got to have a certain period of gestation. It'll run anywhere from a couple of weeks to 128 days. And then your babies will be born. But you don't want your babies born at a time when it's going to be hard for them to continue to live. You want them to get weaned for a couple of weeks and then be able to find food for their own and on their own time. So you want an abundant food supply, and you want a time for them, if they're herbivores like these woodchucks, they can find a lot of greens to eat. And if they're not herbivores, like a coyote or a fox, they want a lot of these little critters like voles and mice and rabbits that are eating all these greens to be ready. And then they've had the whole summer to fatten themselves up, to get trained on how to find food and how to eat it. And then at the end of the year, there's a dispersal ritual. They will either be kicked out of the family home or possibly incorporated into it in terms of beaver and coyote, but it is generally a dispersal time. Winter is a brutal time to mate. If you look at even with climate change and global warming, December may be above 30 degrees on an average, but it's freezing at night. And January and February are very close to freezing all the time. And this means that most of the water is going to be tied up in ice and snow. It's going to be lower humidity, windier. And because plants aren't green or they're dormant, if you're an herbivore, there's not going to be anything to eat unless you're a rabbit taking the bark off of trees. Your prey, if you're a meat eater, is going to be hidden. Maybe it's hibernating. Maybe it's just hidden in the bushes or absent. Maybe it's migrated. And if you do catch something, you're going to have to catch more of it just to stay warm. So just last week, I was walking in the Newton Cemetery and I noticed these prints in several places. And these are very interesting prints. It's a very interesting animal. You see a very large thumb and 4 fingers and sort of a waddling stride. This is a very early Valentine. This is one of our earliest maters. It's an opossum, a Virginia opossum, which didn't really find its way up here to the southern New England area until the early 1900s. But Virginia opossums are very adaptable animals. And this makes it possible for them to come up here and survive in the snow. But it also makes them possible to become casualties of the extreme weather events that we have. This is the foot of my driveway, and we were trying to figure out what had happened to this opossum. My neighbor, Gary Greenberg, took this photo and called me and told me there was an opossum down there. And I was thinking, how could there be a dead opossum at the base of my driveway? But then I thought, well, maybe one of the snowplows hit it and stunned it. And that's what it was doing there. So I raced out to look. And when I got there, there was no opossum. So the opossum you're seeing here was probably playing dead, playing possum, as they say. And that's really interesting because it gives us a chance to see the exposed ears on the animal and the naked tail coated now in ice and snow. And that is why you'll often find opossums with pieces of their ears and tails missing due to frostbite. Yes, they may be adaptable, but there are certain limits. So our Virginia opossum that's up here is going to be mating in January all the way through July. But it's one of the earliest maters. And it's an extraordinarily adaptive omnivore. It's an animal that's anywhere from 4 to 7 pounds, not very long, maybe 16 inches from nose to the base of tail, and yet another 10 to 12 inches for the tail. But it's equipped with 50 fearsome teeth. Take a look at this mouth and these teeth. This animal can really do quite a lot of damage if it catches a small rodent or snake or anything else that it wants to eat. But it's also adapted to eating your cat's cat food, to eating your garbage, to eating the bird seed and berries, and just about anything else it can get its little mouth around. It has a very distinctive look because of its bare ears and its bare tail and its five-fingered mitts. The other thing that's really distinctive about these opossum, they're marsupials. There are only marsupial in Massachusetts. So when these animals give birth, they give birth to something that's barely formed. It's about the size of a grain of rice. And what the female will do is she'll lick the mouth of the womb all the way down to her pouch. She has a pouch. She'll lick that so it's nice and slick and wet. And then these tiny, barely embryos that don't have well-developed at all hind limbs will swim into her pouch. And in her pouch, there's a ring of nipples. There are 12 nipples with another nipple right in the middle. And they will attach, they'll glom onto one of those nipples. It'll swell, and they'll be basically stuck there for 8 weeks while they actually grow into a full-grown tiny opossum. When they emerge, they get a free ride for 4 weeks. This is a devil of a way to be a mother, to have all your kids, and remember, there can be up to 13, 12 nipples with the one in the center that are hanging on to you for dear life as you try to go about your daily business. But in 12 weeks, they'll be totally and fully independent. Now, she's teaching them in those 12 weeks how to find food. And one of the things opossums do is they'll eat roadkill. And this also makes them very prone to becoming roadkill, because if they're out there eating roadkill, it's easy to get run over. But they and skunks, also great eaters of roadkill, do succumb to highway deaths quite often. Another early January breeder, but a different strategy, is the beaver. The beaver is an herbivore. It eats no meat. It's not an omnivore. It doesn't have all the opportunities that a possum has to eat. So you're talking about an animal now. It's a fairly big animal. It's maybe 35 to 80 pounds if it's a large male. You're talking something the size of a golden retriever, and maybe 2 to 3 feet long, not counting the tail, which is going to add another 10 to 18 inches. So you're talking about a very big animal, and one that's really well suited to engineering. So they engineer these lodges. This is a pond lodge, so it's out in the middle of a pond. You'll see a cutaway here that's rather generous because the lodge is much shallower than that, with its 2 underwater entrances. And you can see in this drawing that the beaver is bringing a stick back. And that's because the beaver has a cache of food. You can see it here. You can see a few sticks here. That is its submerged larder. That cache feeds it all winter long, even if there's ice. So if you look at that lodge, this is a bank lodge that you're seeing down in Pennsylvania. My sister took this picture. And in this lodge, you have the bank. It's protected. Again, the entrance is underwater, and there's your food cache. So down there, you've got to store enough food so that all the beaver inside that lodge, and there may be 5 or 6 of them, can have enough food to last through the winter until the ice leaves. And this means that for a single beaver is going to eat in the space of 2 days, a single beaver is going to eat the equivalent of a 3-inch tree. That's nibbling the bark off of the main stem and then eating the small branches at the base. You can see how large the beaver are. They love greens, but if they don't get greens, they'll be eating in their own pile. They're monogamous. It takes a good pair to build these lodges. This is a bank lodge in the Quabbin area. You can see where the hot air vent upstairs at the top is a little bit melted. And these footprints are an otter trying to figure out if there's anything they can do to get in. They are not welcome. Muskrats will go into that lodge and be tolerated by the beaver, but not otter. So beaver are monogamous, and they have a very long gestation period. So when they breed in January, they've got a 128-day gestation period. It can almost be 3 or 4 months. Once those kits are born, and they'll give birth to 4 or 5 of them, that'll be in May or June. And those kits are fully equipped to swim. They're born, they have fur, they're born with their eyes open. This is due to that long gestation period. They're fully furred, they've got their front teeth, they can bite things, they can open their eyes, and they're swimming within a week. They're swimming. Now, they aren't weaned, even though they may be taking solid food and exercising those front teeth. They aren't weaned for 2 months. That happens in July and September. And then they disperse. But let me go back here for a second. Then they disperse, but they don't disperse right away. That family unit, the young and the 2 parents, will stay together until the spring after 2 winters. So that's why the lodge fills up with more than just the adult pair of beaver. And when they do disperse, it'll be dispersed in the spring, and those animals will be forced out by the parents. They'll have to find their own ponds or create their own ponds somewhere else. So why does the groundhog, which is a true herbivore, why does the groundhog get associated with February too? This is really early mating for something that is a true herbivore, requires greens. Is that groundhog really looking for love? Well, the groundhog is a true hibernator. So most of the winter, it's living off the fat of its own body. And all summer and spring and fall, you'll see it nose down, like this picture on the left, grazing on everything it can get its mouth on, including your garden. When it emerges from hibernation under your shed or some other place, a burrow that it's dug or commandeered from somebody else, when it emerges, it can have lost more than 30% of its body weight just by hibernating and living off its own fat. But hibernation allows it to live it off its own fat because it slows down its metabolism. And that animal's temperature, its body temperature, will drop to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. That's barely above freezing. And its heart will beat only like 5 times a minute. But periodically during that hibernation, there'll be a little increase in body temperature, maybe up to 98, increase in heart rate. And then he drips back down into hibernation. So what's he doing in February? This doesn't make any sense. Well, it may start with Candlemas. Candlemas is February 2nd. And Candlemas is a Christian ceremony where the priest or the minister for the church would give out candles to all the people who'd run out of candles over a long, dark winter. But how did it then get from that to the weather prediction? Well, there were Candlemas poems, both in Scotland and Germany. And in Germany, the poem ran, "For as the sun shines on Candlemas Day, so far will the snow swirl until May. For as the snow blows on Candlemas Day, so far will the sun shine before May." Now, the Germans were a little long-worded, but the Scots, men of few words, had a shorter way of saying this. They say, if Candlemas Day is bright and clear, there'll be 2 winters in the year. So now we have Candlemas turning to weather prediction. And the hedgehog or badger, hedgehog in Britain, badger in Germany, that was used to predict this may have gotten conflated with the groundhog, which these immigrants found in Pennsylvania. So now we have Candlemas turning into Groundhog Day. But Groundhog Day here in the US is big, big business. I have a very dear friend who has 2 grade school size children. And she and her husband during the pandemic found that they could watch the Groundhog Day down in Gobbler's Knob, which is where Puxatawny Phil hangs out. This is Phil's stump that he comes out of. That they could watch this at 7 o'clock in the morning. So it became a yearly ritual. They still watch this. And they tell me that it's big, big business. They say there are tens of thousands of people who come to watch this. Phil has a circle of cognoscenti who are in the inner circle. They're in tuxedos and top hats. They take Phil out of that. I want to go back here for a second. They take Phil out of this stump to make the weather prediction, but not to see his shadow. Phil gets to choose between 2 scrolls. And this year, they told me when they were watching that they went to get Phil out of the stump, and Phil didn't want to come out of the stump because it was freezing cold, and they were pulling all this straw and hay out before they could finally get Phil out of there to pick the scroll. And Phil, of course, is the same Phil. He's 103 years old. He has a special lifelong elixir that he takes to preserve his life. But when they get him out, they then talk to him in groundhogese. She swears this is so funny. And I said, well, what does groundhogese sound like? And she makes this kind of a sound that sounds like this. It sort of sounds like chattering teeth. And she explains that one man holds Phil, and you'll notice that he's got gloves on. Under those gloves are steel mesh because Phil once bit a reporter. And he talks to Phil and he says, okay, which of these scrolls is the right one to pick? Phil indicates which one it is, and they read Phil's weather prediction. So Phil never gets to see his shadow. But success breeds great rivalries. Phil may have been in business since 1887, but Ms. G became the Massachusetts state groundhog in 2014. She started predicting in 2008. And it's a funny story. It's a sweet story. So she is a Mass Audubon groundhog ambassador that is actually an indoor groundhog. And she made her first forecast in 2008. And because she visits schools, grade school kids got really enchanted with Ms. G. And so did a local weather forecaster. And that weather forecaster started meeting with a representative, Alice, I think it's Peach, or maybe it's Peach. And this woman introduced legislation So the Senate and the House finally approved Ms. G as the official state groundhog in 2014. Deval Patrick signed the bill, and Miss G was charged with her official duty of determining the weather forecast. Now, according to Miss G's PR, she's much more accurate than Phil. She's got a 64% record. Phil has less than a coin toss record in his accuracy. But regardless of how accurate she is, the Audubon people haven't been able to keep their website accurate. They forgot to update the date in her latest forecast. Her latest forecast, of course, was for 6 more weeks of winter. And so the local wolves ate her. No, I'm just teasing. They didn't eat her. She, again, is an indoor groundhog and never gets an opportunity to meet a wolf, let alone a coyote or anything else that's local. So is Phil really looking for love? Well, maybe in southern Pennsylvania, he'll come out of his burrow in February. But in Massachusetts, groundhogs actually do come out of their burrows early. The males emerge 3 weeks before the females and do look for love. They are looking to mate with a female in her burrow. They're very good noses. They'll be able to find the female's burrow and mate, and then return and go right back to sleep and hibernation. So that groundhog may be making that journey in March, not February. And after a gestation period of about only 32 days, the female will have a single litter. And it's usually around 4 little pups. And you can see them lined up here. They're very cute. Those pups will appear in April or May, just in time for good greens. They'll be weaned at 6 months. So by late June, you've got really good greenery. And these rodents will be mowing things down. They'll look like Jabba the Hutt. They're just like jelly rolls moving across the landscape, especially interested in your garden because those are very tender greens. A groundhog is not a small animal. It can weigh 7 to 14 pounds. And this lady, from the tip of her nose to the tip of her short tail, might be 25 inches. So we're not talking about a small animal. We're not talking about something squirrel-sized. They can eat a lot of greenery. Okay, but what about the animals that eat only meat, the meat-eating predators? How are they coping with this winter courting? Because it is brutal out there. Well, they do it partly because they're bigger and heavier. You lose heat less fast when you have more mass. You're heavier and larger. And you can see this in little kids. The smaller you are, the faster you lose heat. And that's why they're always complaining about being cold when you as an adult feel warm. But so size is part of it. A great horned owl is maybe 3 pounds. That's very heavy for a bird, and he's a big bird. Your coyotes and your bobcats and your foxes, again, heavy animals. They have heavy, deeply furred coats. That also helps them. Great horned owl has very, very thick down feathers under its outer layer of feathers. But they also depend on a food supply that's still active in winter. And this would be the rabbits and the hares and the mice and the voles and things like that. Especially voles. And you can see the voles here. They're little 5 to 7 inch critter, maybe weigh 1.5 ounces. But they're incredibly, incredibly fecund. One pair of moles can produce 100 moles, 100 other voles in a year. So we're talking about 5 to 10 litters per year between a pair of voles. And this makes for a very abundant food supply. But these voles are primarily herbivores. They will eat insects and worms if they don't have anything else to eat. So what the devil are they doing in this winter? They're living in the subnivean zone. If you have only 8 inches of snow above you, you can keep the ground at 32 degrees or warmer. You have a little frozen ice ceiling here and lots of roots and plants to nibble on. They'll be girdling your trees and eating your landscape and being prime food for animals that can hear them down there. And there are a couple of animals that can hear them down there. The foxes, the coyotes, and the owls, the great horned owls. So I found this on the web, and it's a wonderful example of what it takes to catch a vole under the snow. This red fox can hear the vole, and he's trying to get the jump on it. Doesn't know quite how deep to go. He's missing it. No, that was a bad jump. That jump didn't end a thing. That jump he comes up empty on. This is a very persistent fox. Has he caught something? Nope, nothing. Whoops, wait a minute. He hears it now. Is he going to get it? He's got one. But you saw how many times that animal had to move in order to get that one fox, to get that one vole. A great horned owl has an advantage over the fox. These ear tufts on each side are not ears. They're just tufted feathers to make the owl's head disappear more in camouflage. But the owl, while the fox has, symmetrical ears on each side, the owl has one ear up and one ear down as well as on each side. So the owl gets three-dimensional depth perception, where the fox will only get like two-dimensional depth perception. An owl can punch through the snow and catch that rodent instantly. And they are very early and very deadly Valentines. To give you a sense of what these owls sound like, and I'm going to focus mostly on the great horned in the middle and the barred owl at the side, these owls below, the saw-whet, the eastern screech owls, and the barn owl, do live in our area, but they don't sound at all like hoot owls. The screech owl, in fact, doesn't even sound like a screech. It sounds like a whinnying horse, a sort of a woo, kind of sound. But let's play for you the great horned owl and the barred owl so that you can get a sense of how they sound.
Classic hoot owl is the great horned owl. Listen to this deep vocalization. Both males and females hoot. One typical rhythm is similar to the phrase, "Who's awake? Me too. Who's awake? Me too." Now listen to the barred owl, which calls out a distinctive rhythmic series of 8 or 9 hoots. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?
So these two large native owls are present in the Newton area. We see them in Cold Spring Park, we see them in Webster Woods, and we see them other places. The barred owl has started to make inroads into the great horned owl's territory. And what you see on the left is the great horned owl, and on the right, a barred owl in a threat display. He's trying to make himself bigger because he was menaced by a great horned, we think it may have been a red-tailed hawk. And the barred owl is trying to appear larger than he really is. The great horned is much larger than the barred owl by a couple of inches and maybe a pound. But it's hard for owls to reproduce because they have no penetrating parts, unlike our mammals. They mate cloaca to cloaca. And that means that to inseminate a female, they've got to make several attempts and get really, really close. These are the great horned owls mating in Habitat, which is a Mass Audubon sanctuary in Belmont. And you can see the female is waiting patiently for the male to get into position so they can align their cloacas to mate. And they will mate several times. They mated all through December, all through January, when Rick Olick was taking these pictures. And it finally produced a viable insemination, and the female was able to lay eggs. But while she's working on egg production, they're making sure that they've got a nest. And owls don't build a nest. They commandeer nests of other birds. In this case, this great horned at Habitat had evicted 2 ravens. You'll see them in the blue circles. The ravens aren't happy about that. They were trying to dive bomb the great horned owl, but they couldn't drive the owl off. The owl did commandeer the nest. And the nests will look wildly, wildly different. It might be a stick nest made by another bird, like a raven, like a, oh gosh, even great horned, even great blue herons, or red-tailed hawks. Well, they'll take those nests over because they're mating so early, the other birds can't come back to their nest. They'll take over boxes like the one on this side, and they'll even adopt potential nest sites made out of landscape cloths. This was taken in the New England's Arnold Arboretum. And the Arnold Arboretum has been very good about putting these nesting platforms up with a couple of boughs of greenery to make them more owl friendly, I guess, for their great horned owls. And this picture was taken there. This female has 4 eggs, actually. You can see a couple of her chicks out there, but they incubate those eggs for around a month. And then they brood the young, and that's what she's doing here. See how she's got her feathers fluffed out. You can see one little head emerging from those feathers. But that's how she keeps them warm through the winter season until they've got enough down and enough feather covering to feel secure enough to start venturing out of the nest. When they're fledged, you can see how they start to get quite downy. They look like plush toys. This one doesn't have its ear tufts yet. When they're starting to fledge, they start to get quite adventurous. And by 5 to 8 weeks, they're branching. They're moving out of the nest onto the branches that support the nest and just hanging out there in rain and shine. And that down keeps them nice and warm. You'll notice that they have tail feathers and a few wing feathers. And by 9 to 10 weeks, they're actually flying up and down. They're moving their arms up and down and their legs up and down, and they're jumping around and flying. And they won't disperse until the end of the summer. The parents actually feed them for quite a long time. But 3 to 4 months after they've fledged is when they actually disperse. But while they're out there doing this branching, they often fall out of the nest and fall onto the ground. This doesn't mean they're helpless. You can see that this animal has really sharp talons and a formidable beak. It's also able to fan out its wings, even though it can't fly yet. It's able to fan out its wings to make itself look really big and a very intimidating threat display. It's able to get back up to the nest, and this is a barred owl, not a horned owl. It's a wonderful set of photographs by Mary Holland, who does the Naturally Curious blog. This barred owl came out of this hole in the tree. You can see it on each side, and uses its wings and its talons. You can see how it's using its talons and its wings to climb up and climb back down. One of the chief prey animals of the great horned owl is this smelly Valentine. And the reason it's a prey animal is because striped skunks are courting in mid-February. That's their peak courting time. They're polygamous. The males become very active. They will go well beyond their normal territories, seeking out dens of females. And sometimes females den together. And the males will mate with multiple females, as many as they can. If the female is unhappy with the male and doesn't want to mate with them, the female will spray the male. And I know this from experience, not that I was trying to find a female, but the alley between my house and my neighbor's house, I used to call Skunk Alley, because the skunks looking for love would walk up and down there. And I would routinely, in the middle of February, my bedroom is on the 2nd floor, by the way, I would be routinely woken up with my eyes tearing from musk that some female had used to repel an overly amorous suitor. I don't know how that musk penetrates thermopane windows, but it did. So those guys are out there defending their harems and mating with as many females as they can. The female striped skunk has a very variable gestation. It's usually around 60 days, but it can be 77. And the theory is that this is delayed implantation of the embryo. But once it is implanted, she's off excavating her own den. She's totally on her own. The male has no part in rearing the young and taking care of anything except inseminating the female. And she'll make her den under your shed or under your porch, so secure it, or she'll dig one, or she'll take over a groundhog burrow. But she will take care of those little kit skunks, nursing them and weaning them at about 6 to 9 weeks. Now, skunks are heavy animals. We're talking 4 to 10 pounds. And a great horned owl is only a 3-pound animal, but it can carry off. It's those wings, those broad, heavy wings are quite good at lifting a 4-pound skunk. And in case it doesn't want to lift it, it just bites the head off, swallows it, and then drags the rest of it off. So your skunk, which can be, if you look at the length of this animal, it's got a wonderful, long, fluffy tail. That tail with the body of the skunk can make the animal 30 inches long, 20 to 30 inches long. Skunks are omnivores. They're insectivores primarily, but they're omnivores. They'll eat anything, again, that they can get their little claws and paws on. And what I want to bring to your attention here are photos that were taken by Graham Russell out, I believe, in South Dakota, may have been Colorado. But you see the size of the claws on this skunk. And those claws are used for digging, for tearing off bark, so that they can get to the insects there. And you'll notice that they have wonderful grinding teeth as well as penetrating teeth. However, in spite of those claws, they can't climb trees. And because of the way their body is constructed, they're not a fast runner. So their best defense is something else that I'll tell you about in a moment. But while they're looking for that tasty meal, because they're omnivores, they'll be eating roadkill, which does make them possibly run over by themselves. And that's why you're experiencing all the dead skunks on the road. They'll be raiding your garbage. They'll be digging up your yard, both the grass when they're looking for grubs and your mulch. And they leave a very distinctive cone-shaped hole, as you can see here. They will dig up wasps' nests and eat the wasps. They're a very enterprising little animal. But that defense that they have, their ultimate defense, is their musk. They only have a teaspoon or two of musk. And they can shoot it 10 feet, by the way. They can aim it as a stream, or they can aim it as a cloud. But once they've sprayed about 4 or 5, maybe 6 times, it's going to take them 10 days to replenish that musk supply. So they don't spray without giving fair warning and trying to drive whatever is intimidating them away. And your first warning that a skunk is getting ready to spray is the skunk will raise its tail and chatter and stomp its feet and growl at you. If that doesn't dissuade you, if you're still coming at them, the skunk will start to put its back toward you. That's your first warning. If you can see the skunk's rear end and the skunk is looking at you, he's aiming over his shoulder. If you can see that, you're getting ready to be sprayed. And that will, I cannot tell you how it makes your eyes water. It really is temporarily blinds you. But again, the skunk won't do this without warning. Now, another smelly Valentine, as well as noisy, is the red fox. And I say smelly because in February, when they meet and mate, the male is laying down a scent trail that smells very much like skunk. And if you cross one of your own hiking trails and you're thinking, this is a really grim smell, it's probably a fox, not a skunk that's sprayed, unless your eyes start to water. If your eyes start to water, then it's probably a skunk. But red foxes are also notorious for their noisiness. It's something called a vixen scream, and it's designed to travel miles and attract a mate. And you'll hear screaming. In fact, the local police departments will tell you that in February, they get a huge number of complaints of people being attacked in the woods, women being attacked in the woods that turn out to be foxes. And this is what that fox sounds like. So that red fox is calling to each other. They find each other. They find a den that they've used before, or they commandeer a woodchuck hole, and they clean out the den. The den is only used for breeding. This is not where they spend the night in comfort. They spend the night under bushes and tree falls and branches of branch falls and things like that, where they can cut the wind. But they will maintain that den, and they will raise a litter. But those young won't be born until March or April. They have a gestation period of about 53 days. So when they're born in March and April, they're going to spend that first month in the den. They'll have about 6 little kit foxes. They can have as many as 11 if the food is really good and really plentiful. But both parents take care of the foxes. And here you have a red fox bringing a squirrel, and you can see how small the fox is based on how large the squirrel looks. You'll see the foxes both hunting and bringing prey back to the den. And the parents will supply that solid food, some regurgitated, but some solid, for the little kits at home until they're weaned at about 12 weeks of age. Now, how small is that fox? That fox is weighs about as much as your domestic cat. We're talking 7 to 15 pounds max on a red fox. Males a little bit heavier. And you're talking about an animal from the tip of its nose to the tip of its tail being anywhere between 35 to 40 inches. So again, it's a small animal. It looks big because its fur is very dense and very long and very fluffy. Both parents defend the den because the young fall prey to everything. They fall prey to raccoons, to weasels, to anything that can get to the very small kits when they're pretty much defenseless. In this case, a raccoon has been attracted to the den. It can smell the kit pups. And the mother was successful at driving it off. But the raccoon weighs almost as much as the fox, is equipped with as nasty teeth as the fox, and as nasty claws. So it could be a nasty pitched battle. Once they leave the den, foxes have an idyllic life. The little kits are having a ball when they play, and they're learning to hunt while they're playing before they disperse in the fall. And this was on a visit down to see my sister in Pennsylvania. This was outside her window. Whoops, I was supposed to start the video. Here we go. Outside her window, and we got to watch these little foxes romping their little hearts out, jumping on each other, trying to exert dominance, learning how to get an advantage on something, and generally having a good time. All of these play skills will be important in their ability to hunt, and certainly will be important in their leaving for dispersal in the fall. Massachusetts has another kind of fox in addition to the red fox. You'll notice the red fox has a white tip on its tail and black legs. We have something called a gray fox, and they're both quite plentiful in Massachusetts and suburban. But the gray fox is distinctive because it can climb trees. It has retractable claws, which make it very unusual. To give you a sense of how unusual, we're going to watch them climbing trees.
It's now the spring of 2021, but the day this video was recorded was 4.5 years ago in the late summer of 2016. And I know it doesn't look like late summer for Central Texas, but it is. A mother gray fox brought these 5 fox kits into our backyard one day, and it seemed like she had just taken them out for an ice cream, and they were on a sugar high. And they kind of hung around and played a little bit for a while here, but then got going on this one straight up cedar tree, and they got to playing tag and you're it, and I'm going to bite you and wrestle you and run up this tree, and they were just going crazy. They were running up this tree and jumping out and dive bombing each other, and it was about the wildest thing that we had ever seen here. A lot of people either haven't heard or maybe even don't believe that gray foxes climb trees, and I think that this is pretty good evidence that they actually do it. And not only do they do it, but they have a great time while they're doing it.
So in addition to foxes, we have coyotes, and they also mate in February. They excavate their dens in March, and they're a complex animal. They have a very interesting, complicated gene pool, which may include some dog, although it's very difficult for a dog to mate with a coyote because they have to be around at exactly the right time. But they do have some wolf in them, so our eastern coyote is much larger than the western coyote. And how large, you might say? Well, an eastern coyote can be anywhere from 35 to 47 pounds. That large range of 47 pounds would be a male, and sometimes males can get up to 60 pounds. That's a big animal. But they'll be bigger than a fox, noticeably bigger than a fox, and long. They're anywhere from 28 to 47 inches long. Now, a male is going to be maybe a third heavier than a female when you see them, but they have a very narrow muzzle like a fox, and they very, very thick fur. So they look like they're going to be a lot heavier and bigger. Coyotes den where they can in March. It can be a stump of an old tree, a hollow log. It can be an abandoned burrow from a woodchuck or something like that, cracks in the rocks, caves, or it can be under your deck or your shed. This is my shed. And the coyotes that were living under there was a mother and her 6 pups. She had her den, which was in a rock crevice on one of the Bowen School playing fields, the upper field, which is a bit a ways. Bowen is the red building you see behind my shed. The den had been discovered by a dog, and the female was very upset. So she moved her pups during spring break when nobody was on the playground and nobody was around, right? She moved them under my shed, and I had no knowledge that the pups were there or that the female was there until my neighbors called me one night in early May, or maybe it was the end of April, I guess, and said, "Barbara, there's a coyote and she's got her pups under your shed." And I had the privilege of watching her cart each of those 6 pups to the new den. I'd watch her go down. She'd, without making a sound, the little pups would come tumbling out on that brown area. She'd pick up one, the others would go back, and she'd make a 20-minute trip down to the place where the new den was and come back and get the next one. In the morning, they were all gone, and you wouldn't have noticed they were there except for the tramped ground. Coyotes are great parents. They do share duties. This is a male with its pup, and they do feed their kids. They begin by regurgitating food while the kits are still being nursed. This is a set of pups being nursed for their first 5 to 7 weeks. But during that nursing time, they still do get regurgitated food from the female and the male. So it's been sort of semi-processed, it's been chewed up. It's not big jumps, lumps, or crunches. So they get a pretty healthy diet. The pups will come out of the den between an age of 8 and 9 weeks, and they'll start to tussle and play and try to exert dominance. 1 or 2 of those pups will be the dominant pups, and those dominant pups may stay with the parents to help raise the next litter. So you have like essentially a pack. They will be hunting on their own by mid-September, and that's when you'll start encountering these coyotes that you may think are bold, or are menacing you, they're not. Their first years, they're curious, they don't know who you are. Just put up your arms, make a lot of noise, and they'll take off. They're fully grown at 9 months. And if they're not the dominant pup, they'll be dispersed by the parents, in no uncertain terms, to their own territories. Now, coyotes howl for a reason, and that reason is not that they've found prey. You don't want to howl and advertise that you've got to kill because everybody else, the bobcats, other coyotes, weasels, everybody will come for your prey. So you're not howling to advertise a kill. You're howling, and they do, especially in mid-February, to advertise for a mate. Here I am, where are you? They also practice howling, the little ones, in late summer. And it's an important skill to have because that's how they locate each other. And it also is a way that they defend and advertise their territory to non-family members, non-pack members. If a mother encounters a dog or an intruder by the den, she will howl and move really fast to draw the intruder off. So there are lots of reasons for a coyote to howl. The last predator we're going to talk about is the bobcat, the North American bobcat. This is a pretty heavy, hefty cat. It's anywhere from 15 to 35 pounds, and it can get up to 47 inches long, 30 to 47 inches long. It can be distinguished from a lynx because it doesn't have big tufts on its ears. It has very small tufts. And it has a black tail with a white bottom. A lynx has a very black tail. It also has shorter legs and smaller feet. Lynx have these giant mitts that they're essentially snowshoes. So the lynx is really a Canadian animal, a Maine, Northwoods, and Vermont and New Hampshire kind of animal. But we do have them in the suburbs of Boston. And here's an old Globe article from 2020 saying that, yes, they're here, and they're here in numbers. Dave Wattles, who is the expert for the Mass Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, he studies all the fur-bearing animals, says that they're thriving here in eastern Massachusetts. And he estimates there are about 3,500, don't make it any worse than it is, 3,500 of them in Massachusetts. And that they have a very successful harvest of 80 to 100 bobcats a year out in the western part of the state by trapping and hunting. But in the eastern part, there's not enough of them to trap and hunt, so they don't allow that to happen. While you may think they're an odd animal to see, Mass Wildlife does not believe they are. So if you want to, you can report them, but you don't need to report the sightings. Now, corroborate this, I received an email from the principal of Bowen School, which is one house away from my house. And this email shows, it was emailed to Diana Guzzi, who's the principal. It was emailed by the woman who took the picture, Doran. She found a bobcat on the Bowen School playground at approximately 8:45 in the morning on February 14th, Valentine's Day. So here is this animal sitting there. They are dusk and dawn crepuscular hunters. So they hunt in the dusk and the dawn, early morning, early evening. And they're going to be hunting primarily rabbits and squirrels and things like that, which we have in abundance in Newton. So they are here. Unlike the other carnivores we talked about, bobcats are obligate carnivores. They have to have meat. They can't eat anything else. They can't digest protein from plants, or they can't eat other things than meat. They can, but it just isn't going to sustain them. They hunt by sight. They smell. They have a good sense of smell, but they hunt primarily by sight. They'll stalk an animal and ambush it. They have runs where they know that rabbits run, and they will ambush the rabbits that are going by. And rabbits and hares, snowshoe hare in the western part of the state, are their primary prey animals. But they've diversified, especially when rabbits are scarce, and they go after skunks, opossums, squirrels, voles, mice, muskrats, and birds, and they'll even eat snakes. So they're opportunistic, and they will eat anything as long as it's meat. The interesting thing about the rabbits and the hares is if they find a good run, they'll just hang out there and milk it for all it's worth. catching the rabbits as they run by. They're solitary animals, though. They don't form a pair bond and stay together. The males are quite polygamous. They have large territories, up to 30 square miles. And within that single male's territory may be multiple female territories, smaller, maybe 5 square miles. So a male may be breeding with 5 or 6 or 7 females if he can find them. And he finds them by scent marking and yowling his head off as she is yowling her head off. So they will scent mark by urinating and defecating. They will also scent mark by rubbing their cheeks and the scent glands in their cheeks on posts, on stones, on anything that they can advertise their presence on. And their peak breeding, of course, will be January, February. So if you're hearing yowling like a cat fight, and they do sound like cats, that could be a bobcat. Once he's mated, though, that bobcat says sayonara, and the female is left on her own to care for the babies, to endure almost a 2-month gestation period, meanwhile feeding herself, and then feeding and nursing the kits that come along. In their natal den, she'll have an average of 2, but it can vary anywhere from 1 to 6, and hunting for them so that she can feed them solid foods and entice them to start venturing out of the den at a year of age. She weans them at 2 months of age and will escort them to what are termed shelter dens. So she'll have multiple shelter dens. They can also be ambush sites. And she'll teach those young how to hunt over the summer and the fall. A friend of mine who lived in Denver had a deck, and she had a family of bobcats living under her deck in one of these shelter dens and picking off the rabbits that would run up and down her backyard. They were quite successful at nailing those rabbits. But after about 11 months or so, those kittens are full grown, they know how to hunt, and they're kicked out of the family. They're totally evicted by the mother. And she does this because she's about to start mating again in January and February. And so the whole cycle starts all over again. And a very successful cycle it is. So we're going to take questions now. And Beth, what do you think you've got for me?
Thank you, Barbara, so much. It's so much wonderful information and so much to think about. Now, why in the world did a woodpecker get listed as being the one who, it means you're not going to have a partner? That just doesn't seem fair.
It doesn't. It really doesn't.
But thank you. I will start with some questions. Where you showed us the dens and the various living places of a lot of the animals. Where do the possums live?
Brush piles.
Okay.
They don't really have, none of these animals live in their dens. They're basically natal dens.
Right.
For the kits and the pups and the kittens. So.
And is that safe? Do a lot of them get lost to predators?
Oh yes, baby foxes, baby coyotes will definitely be taken by raccoons, by skunks if they're very small. So yeah, they have by even by owls.
So the possums, given that mom's been hauling them around in her pouch, I presume she's a solitary parent?
Yes, she is a solitary parent.
Okay, it's fascinating. I hadn't thought before about the role of whether they are joint parenting or single parenting.
Well, I got to tell you that it just fascinates me that this animal can move with that many critters hanging onto it. It just it's a weird way to have a life.
It is. I saw one running last year, a mom running with her babies hanging onto her on my street in the middle of Newton Center. It was really cool. So the groundhogs, clearly there have been multiple fills over the time that.
Oh, no. They insist that Phil is 103 years old and he eats a special elixir.
Oh, will he share it?
You're right.
So how long, do you know how long the average groundhog lives?
Hmm. I, this is off the top of my head, and I may be wrong. I seem to recall saying somewhere reading that it was about 7 years. It's not a long-lived animal.
Okay.
In captivity, they can last 15 years. I mean, look at Ms. G. She's been going since 2008. So
So that was my next question. There really has been just one Ms. G so far.
as far as I know, there's been only one Ms. G.
Okay.
And both she and Phil don't hibernate because they got a cushy life. I mean, they live indoors. They are animal ambassadors that go to grade schools and all sorts of wonderful locations. Not the Riviera, but still fun locations.
That is neat. We have a question from someone who says she came in late. She just found out about this. Did Barbara talk about beavers? Yes, she did. And for those of you who may not have heard it or you may want to hear it again, this is being recorded. And once it is edited, we will send out the link to the recording to everyone who registered for tonight. So you will have a chance to listen to all of the information that Barbara presented to us. We also tomorrow, I will send out a message that will have some information that Barbara's given me to share with you. So look for that tomorrow on Valentine's Day with maybe a surprise with it from Barbara. So keep your eyes out for that tomorrow.
Actually, that surprise was given to me by Nyssa Patten, who's our vice president at Newton Conservators.
And our tech host tonight.
Our tech host tonight, yeah, today.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so uh, we have a question. When do baby skunks develop the ability to spray? She says that she
Oh,
remembers seeing a mom and multiple babies by Cleveland Circle and was glad they didn't seem fazed by all the people passing by as they went through the playground.
skunks are pretty docile animals. Unless you threaten them, they won't threaten you. But beware the babies. At a couple of days old, they can start to spray. Now, if you get the baby when it's been weaned, they can be deskunked, the scent sacs can be removed. And I'm told they make wonderful pets, absolutely fabulous pets. When we were children, there was I think it was a newspaper article, somebody advertising pet skunks, and you had to write a letter to the newspaper to get one. They've been descented and everything. And I remember my older sister wrote a beautiful letter and drew beautiful pictures of skunks, but we never got a skunk. Our parents may have had something to do with that.
Well, that's kind of like declawing a cat, right? I mean, they don't have the.
If you were to let the animal loose in the wild, yes, it would be like declawing a cat, although in declawing a cat, it's much more painful.
Yeah.
And you're really taking off the tip of the animal's finger.
So groundhogs, they're not monogamous.
Definitely not.
Okay. Okay. Uh, we have a comment from Eileen Hoffman in Needham who says she's a wildlife photographer. Share your photos or tell us where to look for them, Eileen. We would really love that.
We would.
So why for the owls is there a need to add nests? Is it because there are fewer hawks' nests, uh, ravens' nests that can be taken over? Why are they just trying to encourage a greater population?
I think primarily people are trying to encourage a greater population. When Arnold Arboretum discovered that they had great horned owls, that's when they started to actively cultivate putting up these landscape cloth nests, which were very, very successful. And it's wonderful that they can provide this kind of habitat. We know from the rodenticides, the escars that are being used in commercial properties and some by some residents, that they're killing an awful lot of owls and hawks and other raptors because they eat the rats that have been poisoned, that are still floundering around. And they eat those animals and it goes up the food chain and it poisons the raptors. So they want to give the raptors as many advantages as they can. And if there are fewer red-tailed hawk nests, because there are fewer red-tailed hawks, then you'll have fewer nests for the owls to take over.
Thank you. And go back to the skunks for a minute. So I didn't know that skunks had harems. It's really strange.
Well, they call them harems, but I think it's just that they visited multiple dens. And females will actually den together. There will be up to 15 females in one den.
Answered my question.
And
So,
so they can go in and have a jolly romp, as it were.
okay. So the owl that you showed us at the beginning, that wonderful owl video where the owl brought the treat. So that was a real Valentine on Valentine's Day. But we haven't seen other animals, sort of bringing a treat or saying, "Oh, this makes me so attractive, aren't I wonderful?" Are there others, or
In the ones that in the ones that I've presented to you tonight, I can't think of one that brings food as a gift to show uh, its sturdiness. Uh, the beaver builds a pond and a dam and great earthworks,
it's true?
So maybe that is part of it. Uh, a lot of these animals can judge hardiness by scent and smell,
Okay.
and by sizing up the other visually. But I don't know whether there are other animals that will bring treats as Valentines.
Well, as you were saying, some of the physical characteristics, like does the fox's fluffy tail, some of the things that they say they have that aren't necessary for survival, but just show, look, I'm such an amazing creature that I can live and be healthy and have this big fluffy tail. Maybe something like that is an attractant too.
Well, that big fluffy tail is very helpful because the fox, when it's wintering before it has a den, is using that tail to cover its nose.
Oh, of course.
And it's a warmth thing. A bobcat can't do that because it's got a little tiny tail. It's a little bobtail. That little bobtail may be 5 inches long, but it's not going to
Right,
wrap around your
right,
nose.
right.
You have to use your paws. So hardiness is going to be good coat, good smell, shiny eyes, good teeth.
It's funny. We have a question from Susan. Where do skunks, raccoons, and bobcats stay at night?
Uh, they can nest in brush. When animals like this den up, skunks will very, very commonly den under your porch and under your sheds. And you really want to keep them closed out because if they decide to have a litter there, it's going to be very smelly for a while. Uh, so any open place, old woodchuck burrows, skunks will use, or they'll dig their own bins. But at night, when they're foraging, it can be brush piles, hollow logs, old tree stumps, anything with a good hole.
Terrific. Alice wrote to us, my leash dog and I once encountered a coyote in Honeywell Woods at the denning time of year. No kits yet, I think. She sat very still and watched as we walked away slowly. Did we do the right thing or were we just lucky?
You did the right thing. You do not want to haze these animals. It's not fair to haze them during the breeding season. They're trying to keep alive for themselves and their young. But the coyote probably was trying to be invisible. I watched the coyote that was feeding the pups under my shed before I knew she was feeding the pups under my shed. I watched her from across the street between the two houses. She was standing there. A dog was barking, and she was just like a sheepdog. She flopped down and waited patiently for the dog to pass. Second, the dog passed with its walker. She got up, crossed the street, started to come up my front steps because these animals are they don't want to expend any energy they don't have to expend. So she's walking up my front steps. I'm on the second floor of my house now with closed windows, looking down, and I made a little clucking sound like this. That coyote froze. She could hear me through double paned windows. She
Yeah.
froze, she backed up and headed into the bushes.
Oh my goodness.
So she's going to avoid you at all possible costs. If you get close to the den, she may start to howl and bark and run in another direction to try to distract you, but she's not going to attack.
Susan wants to know that she wants to say that she was really surprised to hear that there are bobcats in eastern Massachusetts.
So was I.
And she asks, are they in Metro Boston?
Probably. I can't say authoritatively because I've never seen them there, but I would have to imagine that they've gotten into the fens, the Arnold Arboretum, any place where they could find rabbits and squirrels, and those both of those places, or ducks. They've been known to take ducks.
Don't you wonder where the one up by you, where its den is? Where I mean, that's
Oh,
just
I do, and I wish I had seen it. I have to think it was living in Webster Woods, but who knows?
you think it would go that far from Webster Woods to you?
Oh, it's not very far. It's like a 5-minute walk for me.
Okay, but okay. But he still would have to cross streets
Oh,
and
yes. And there have been films, wonderful films that I've watched that show animals that used to hunt during the day, hunting at night, and they know exactly which streets are well traveled and not traveled and when to cross.
amazing. So you said lynx that not that you told us the difference between a lynx and a bobcat. We don't have lynx in
We
this.
do not. Lynx are the great north, the great frozen north. They have very, very long legs and these humongous mitts. They almost look misshapen. You will be able to tell a lynx if you ever see one. They have the fabulous bobcat face, but the ear tufts are substantial. I mean, they really stand out. And the feet they look like they've got snowshoes on, which of course they need for that kind of deep snow because they will hunt through deep snow.
That's neat. Well, we have had so many good questions, and we have Eileen has told us that she has a website where we can find her photos, and I will include that in the message that goes out tomorrow. If there are any last questions, this is the time to quickly type them in. And as I said, we will get you the link so we can see all these amazing videos and photos again. Thank you. It was such an incredible compilation of them.
Thanks for
Okay.
having me.